Hey everyone, today we are going to look at your images from assignment 4. In this assignment we're looking for a large depth of field, which essentially means everything is in focus, and then a shallow depth of field or a small depth of field where only one thing is out in focus and everything in the background and the foreground are out of focus. So let's take a look at some of your work. So we'll start out with Shane's work here, and we see his shallow depth of field image. The golf bag is in focus, and the background of the trees are out of focus. And let's go in and see if we have any file info here. Doesn't look like we have any file info, but in this instance, looks like a pretty good example of a shallow depth of field or small depth of field. So like that, we can see that the clubs are sharp and the background is out of focus. And then we go over to his large depth of field image. In this case, clubs are in focus, and the pin or the flag and the golf hole is also in focus, and the trees in the background too are sharp. So the reason for this is a large aperture value or f-stop value, so 11, 16, or 22. And also, one of the keys here, he's kind of far away from the subject, relatively speaking, compared to this image where he's close up. So the closer you get to something, the more the depth of field increases here. So good work with this, Shane. And then next up we have Amanda's work. And again, small depth of field here. And if we look at our camera data, she's at about f of 10, which is kind of sort of in the middle of the pack on our f-stop setting. So depending on some other factors, it's really going to depend on how the image looks. And in this instance here, the overriding factor that is giving us that small depth of field is she's moved really close to this flower. So it's not so much the f-stop in this situation, it's the proximity or the vantage point to the subject, which in this instance, she's really close to the flower. So we have the flower in focus and the background out of focus. And then again, you can kind of see how she moves back here. And then the flower and the background are in focus. And we'll take a look at our f-stop here. See, same f-stop, f of 10, but she's moved back a little bit, and that really is what's giving us that larger depth of field in this photograph. So it's not as simple as just saying, okay, well, we can take one f-stop number or one type of lens or one vantage point. It's all of these things combined. So a pretty good example here of how being closer or farther away from a subject can make a difference in that depth of field. And then we have Kara's images. And again, no info in there, but very clearly a shallow depth of field here. And then in this one, gosh, I'm not so sure that we can call this a large depth of field. We can see the Sharpies and the batteries and the foreground are starting to go out of focus. So on this one, we want to maybe take a little bit of a closer look at what's going on here. So when we look at Kara's artist statement, where she talks about it, for all of you guys, it's really helpful if you jot down your settings on things, because sometimes those settings don't carry over or get embedded in Photoshop, and they can help me here. And while this is a very nice artist statement, I appreciate how you're explaining the way you went about the shot to us. I don't have those f-stop settings here, and I think in this instance it probably would have been very helpful to know what those are. I would be willing to bet anything that you're probably using an f-stop of 5.6 or 8. In this instance, really the way to get a large depth of field is you're going to have to put the camera on a tripod and use an f-stop that is very high, so an f-stop of 22. but correspondingly you're going to have a very slow shutter setting, and because of that you're going to have to use the tripod to keep the camera from having any motion during that exposure. So that's really how we're going to go get large depth of field in an image like this, especially in a situation where the lighting is really dim. So next up we have Kayleen's image here and her shallow or small depth of field. Beautiful image of the flower. Her vantage point or how close she is to the subject is very near. If we look at our file info, we have a low f-stop number, so low f-stop value of 6.3. Exactly what I'd be looking for out of this assignment. A good mixture of both using that low aperture number and getting very close to the subject. Gives us a very shallow depth of field. The background almost looks really creamy because she's combined those two techniques in here. And then large depth of field, clearly moved back a little bit farther. Although, I gotta say, looking at this, I feel like this isn't an ideal large depth of field. We're still a little bit out of focus back here. And if we go into your file info, you're at an f-stop of 9. We really want to be somewhere around 16 or 22 in this situation. Again, for everybody, it's probably not a bad idea to carry a tripod around. You certainly can sign out tripods up in the media center. And in this situation, we could increase this f-stop up to 16 or 22. But correspondingly, we'd have to take this shutter setting down a little bit lower, closer to a 60th or a 30th to get the correct exposure. So you're almost there, you move back, but I think we need to track a little bit better on the f-stop setting for this one. So next up we have Luttrell's images and a shallow depth of field for sure. We've got background out of focus here. Don't have camera data on there, but certainly that is a good example of a small depth of field. That background out of focus, and by the way, beautiful use of light in this image. Really wonderful shot. And gosh, even taking that one step further here, making a little bit of a creative exposure choice here, making it a little bit darker than perhaps we'd normally see it with the naked eye, but that image kind of becomes a little bit more dramatic. Unfortunately here, I don't think this is the greatest example of a large depth of field, just because that background again looks a little bit soft to me. The foreground, these blades of grass are really sharp, but if you even look at this blade right here, it's not quite as sharp as we'd like it to be with a large depth of field. So in this instance, I suspect that we need to push that f-stop number up a little bit higher. Again, sort of those magic numbers are 16 or 22 on our images to get everything in focus. And then next up we have Scott's work. Nice job here. Looks like we've got really good large depth of field. Let's see if we have any info embedded here. We do. Interestingly enough, you're at an f-stop of 4, which is not ideal for a large depth of field. In fact, it's kind of surprising that you did get the large depth of field here. But the reason that you do have the large depth of field is because you went with a very wide lens. So the lower the focal length is of a lens, the greater the chance is that we're going to have a large depth of field. So remember that there's 3 factors that is going to give us a large depth of field. A wide angle lens, moving farther away from the subject, or using a high f-stop number. In this instance, we've got a good example of a wide angle lens creating that large depth of field effect there. And then the small depth of field, again, very good example of this. And we just look at our file info. You're at that f-stop of 4, which in this instance I'd expect you to be. And perfect example of a large depth of field. And then next up we have Mike's work. Mike, please don't embed your images in PDFs or Word documents. We need to be able to open these up in Photoshop and look at our settings. I can't do that, so it's a little bit of a challenge here for me to evaluate this image. So if we zoom in on this image here, it looks like everything is in focus in this one, and it looks like everything is in focus in this one. So two examples of a large depth of field here rather than having a shallow or small depth of field. You know, if this was a small depth of field, the male emblem might be in focus and the shingles on the house would be out of focus. I'm really not seeing anything in this image that's out of focus, and that's sort of one of the key aspects of having a small depth of field is having something out of focus. So need to work on that shallow depth of field image. And then next up we have Bryant's images. Really creative shot, like what you did here with these little toy baseball figurines, and kind of putting them out in a real baseball area, so it kind of gives the illusion of them being real. Super creative, love that, and a large depth of field, absolutely you do have that going on here in these images. And there we go, we've got that magic number F16 that I like to look for when we're looking at the large depth of field. And then the small depth of field image here, it almost kind of looks like there's a technique in photography called tilt shift lenses, and there's also a tilt shift filter in Photoshop. If you went up to filters, I think it maybe is under lens correction, and yeah, I guess not. But anyhow, it kind of looks like a tilt shift lens effect. We'll look up at our file setting there. We see the f-stop of 1.4. My goodness, using a Zeiss planar lens. Well, anyhow, that is a sweet lens that you are using, and with that f-stop of 1.4, which is a very low number there, we definitely end up getting that very shallow depth of field that focuses just on this runner in the middle of the frame, or the figurine in the middle. So really well done, and super creative image here. So good job. And then next up we have Ivan's images. So again, Ivan, I would just ask yourself and everyone in the class, I need you to upload these images separately from your Word files. You can upload your artist statement or your descriptions in the Word files, but I need the images uploaded separately so we can open those up in Photoshop. That being said, you did everything right here, and I really appreciate the fact that you did give me your exact settings here, which you know, I keep emphasizing to everybody. I want you to write these settings down. This is the information we should have: the shutter speed, the f-stop, and the ISO. If you can write that stuff down and give it to me every time, that is going to make me a happy camper, and it's also going to help you understand what is going on here. So anyhow, f-stop of 16, again, magic number that we talk about, and it looks like everything's pretty much in focus here. Maybe this, as we get close to the foreground, is a little bit out of focus, but again, remember that focus becomes very shallow as things get closer to the camera, so I can kind of understand what's going on there. And then just the opposite here, you switch that f-stop to f4.5, and the big canister in the foreground's in focus, and the smaller ones in the background are out of focus. A good example of what I was looking for here. So appreciate this. Really good note taking here. Just next time, make sure you upload those images separately for me. Thanks. And then next up, went to open up your images, Erica, and I got this crazy message so I can't open them up. Let me pause my video here for a second. We'll see if we can kind of do a workaround. So anyhow, Eric, I can't get this file to open up. I'm not sure what's going on here. As you can see, it's got the JPEG appendix on it, but looks like there's no dot in between the SDOF and the JPEG, and it's a Unix file rather than a JPEG file. So if you could resubmit that, we would appreciate that. And then a large depth of field image, yeah, for sure we've got everything in focus here, from the loaf of bread all the way back to the bottle of hot sauce. Unfortunately, again, I don't know what's going on with that other image. Let me take a look at this in Photoshop. Let's look at our file info. And you're at an F of 27, which is fantastic, exactly what we'd be looking for out of that. So remember, the higher those numbers, the greater that depth of field is going to be. And last but not least, we are going to take a look at the hot and spicy fiery beef here from Armin, and certainly the package is in focus and the shelf in the background is out of focus. Really good example of a shallow depth of field. Again, we go in here, we see the f-stop is 4, 30mm lens on there. Everything's looking really good. Exactly what I'd be looking for out of that shallow depth of field. So great job on that. And then we go in on the large depth of field. You switch your f-stop setting to 27 here, which is exactly what I want you to do. Same photo, just taken a different way with that background in focus, and an excellent way to conclude this module's assignments, because this one is done perfectly, exactly what I wanted. So nice job, Armin. And to everybody, again, keep really good notes of what your settings are on your cameras. If your camera is not embedding that information in Photoshop, if you let me know what that is, it's going to make our job a little bit easier trying to figure out what's going wrong in your images when they don't come out as they should be. So take care, and as always, if you have any questions or concerns, shoot me off an email and we'll get them addressed. Have a good one.